Hi, it's David Smith again at Art of David Smith. So, as you may recall from the last video, we covered how to draw a sugar skull. So, what you can now see on this sheet is I've dropped 3 sugar skulls onto the sheet and actually stretched the paper onto this board that you see it on. So, basically, to stretch a piece of paper, you wet it under the tap, you lay it onto your board, and then using this gum strip, once they're wet, you stick them around the edges and then leave it flat to dry out. And then what happens is, usually no matter how much paint or water you then apply onto the sheet, it will not wrinkle and crinkle like typically happens when you do watercolours or something like that onto paper. So this alleviates all that. So what I've got on here is I've actually pre-prepared one using watercolor pencils, so I'll show you the effects, what you can get with that when we start applying the water. The middle one we're just going to use standard colour pencils with, and then the third one is just going to be a black and grey version using inks. So you can see I've started using various bits of dot work on this, doing some of the details, and again I'm going to introduce water onto this particular skull, and you can see the effects that you get with that, but we're just going to stick in the black and grey scale on there. So in regards to the centre one, as I mentioned in the last video, you're looking to really use quite vivid, bright colours on these things, really bring them to life. And the beauty of doing this is the experimentation. You can have a play with this, you can try various colour versions and different effects and really go to town with it, really. Just play with it. There's no, again, right or wrong way of doing these things. You're just simply playing around with textures, playing around with different paints, pencils, even felts, and have fun. I mean, it's not all meant to be serious, guys. Have fun with these things. Play around, and then obviously you get good. You can have a play around, do stuff for Halloween and things like that, as decorations for the house or just for your own enjoyment. But so as you can see, I'm just starting to throw some of the colours into here now. I've got some very nice Faber-Castell pencils that I use, both the colour pencil, the watercolor pencil version and the normal version. But you don't have to spend that kind of money. For years I had one of the student packs of pencils and use them quite easily. It's about layering the colour in. So if I'm, say, in areas like this, and we start with pinks into the centre, as I move out I can start moving into darker reds, and then if I really wanted I could go onto the tip with a very dark red or even purple. It's about laying the colours over each other to get the effect that you're after. You can really make these as elaborate as you want, or just go with a very plain, as I mentioned before as well, using some of the thick markers is a very good way of dropping colour very, very quickly into a picture like this. So it's literally just a case of making it nice and bright, making it vivid, and playing with the colour combinations. Often you can put colours together in something like this, which you wouldn't typically put together in any other type of drawing. You want them to be bold, you want them to be vivid, so you can really accentuate that and go to town. So you can see quite quickly just by layering the colours in. So in this case I'm starting with the lighter again, so I'll just go all the way around, and I'll just concentrate on half the face at the moment. Finish the other half off a camera to show you the final version, but you can really go to town, really start bringing this piece to life now. So from your original sketch of last week, I mean, for me, I scanned my copy in, and by using Photoshop, and not everybody's got Photoshop obviously, but by using Photoshop I was able to drop 3 of these onto the same sheet. But what most people will have access to is photocopying facilities. So whether you just nip into a shop, take your original skull from last week and just get a bunch of photocopies, and again photocopy paper, I mean this is the same photocopy paper, you can stretch it if you want to do watercolour versions, or you want to introduce water into your drawing, so again stretch your paper to stop that wrinkling effect. Or if you're just going in with the markers or colour pencil, you don't have to stretch your piece of paper. So grab some of all these pencils out of here, and you don't have to do exactly the same on the other side. I've seen these done, I suppose, like with warm colours to one side and cool colours to the other. So your warm colours, obviously your reds, your oranges, your yellows, but then as you move over to the other side you would start incorporating blues, purples, the cooler colours of spectrum, and you can have really great effects by doing something like that. So what colour should I go for next? So again, you don't have to fill out the entire plant. We can accentuate areas by leaving highlights in there. And obviously in this version I put a base colour of a very pale yellow into there to give more of that skull colour, different from this one. But again, that's part of playing with your design and playing with the effects. But obviously if anybody is doing this at home, following the videos and having a go at these, please by all means, I think you can attach pictures onto your comments, so drop a picture on, or if you follow some of the links which are in the description box, you can catch me via Twitter or Facebook, email me through some of the drawings that you've been doing. I would be interested genuinely to take a look, and if you've got any additional feedback, again anything else you would like me to cover, by all means leave me a comment, even if it's just a case of asking what materials I use for my day-to-day drawings. Obviously what I'm doing with these videos is just a very small part of what I do day to day, and again if you follow the descriptions you can see, especially at this time of year, which is just before Christmas, I tend to do a lot of pet commissions and things like that for people. Also with my work at the tattoo shop, which I've mentioned before, it becomes a very quite busy time of the year for us as well, people wanting things drawing up, so my days are not just making YouTube videos, it's all the rest of the artwork and things I have to do as a freelancer to generate artwork, commissions and things like that. So as you can see from this, it's really come together now as a piece. Massive effect just by throwing these colours into there. And obviously I'll carry on off camera and finish this off, but you can see some of the effects what you get with what I regard as a normal colour pencil. Now if I switch my attention through to, we'll go with this pen one first, so the black and white. Now what I tend to do with stuff like this is what we call dot work, so you can use patterns and stuff, but it's a stippling effect with your pen. And what you're doing is, obviously the more stipples you put into a certain area, the darker the colour. Or you can just put the odd stipple there just to break up the area as well. So like on the flower face, if this was a sunflower where the seeds would be, we've just got the odd stipple dropped into those areas. And then obviously on this tooth with this one, kind of blacking that one out just to change it about, but we can put a few more stipples onto here. If I go to the heart detail, bit of a highlight into there, but again by building up the stipple effect around this, it gives a lot more depth to the actual piece, what we're trying to do on there. And then when I introduce the water, you'll be able to see the effects when you get. So it's quite rough at this stage, but what you're going to do is when you introduce the water is lift a lot of the ink up and draw it around. And obviously if you want to then, once you've done the water part of it, let it thoroughly dry out, and then you can go back in again and put some of the additional detail. Now what you don't want is to overload the brush with too much water, but if I go into these areas now, not only do you have the effect of the stipple underneath, but then you start dragging some of the ink around, and giving a different feel to the piece. And you can obviously introduce a touch of colour onto here, so by throwing a bit of blue ink on here as well, you can really draw attention to certain areas. And build it up slowly. Often when you're doing something like this, less is more. You don't want to overdo it. You can always keep adding detail, but you can't take it away. So I can go into these areas, drag some of this colour out and away. Not only does it soften the piece, but gives it a, I suppose, a more three-dimensional feel. And again, this is something, if you were doing this as a tattoo design, this is something what can be replicated by the artist onto the skin. So these effects are all transferable. So as you can see, with not very much, just loaded that, done everything I told you not to do. So with not very much ink onto here, you can really start building up an effect. And again, it's experimentation, play with these things. and don't forget to post me the results. Let's have a look at what you're doing out there, and if you get stuck with a particular part of what I've explained, by all means send me a question and I will help you through. Now, if we transfer our attention to this one, so this is our watercolor pencil. See, we can, I suppose a little bit like this ink one, we can drag this colour down, and depending on how heavy we go in with our watercolour, you can pull that colour around again, and you might have to go over certain areas when it's dried out, brighten some of the colours, but it's a very good way, very quick way of dropping colour into a piece like this. Pull those petals further out. And what I would advise is, if you do use watercolour pencils, is off to the side, do a little test piece. They don't always, when water's applied, show the same colour. It can be, say with a brown or something, if you're putting that onto there, you introduce the water to it, all of a sudden it becomes quite a vibrant orange. So if you're, say, doing a pet piece, you wouldn't necessarily want a bright orange where you were hoping to have a brown. So it's always worth off to the side here, doing a bit of a scribble and then seeing what it looks like. And what I tend to do when I start a piece is, across the top, I will pick out the pencils which I think I'm going to use, write their numbers down. Now, all pencils have a number or a name on the side of them, so I'll write them down, and then I can see what it looks like as a pencil, and I can see what it looks like once the water is applied, and that way I don't introduce the wrong colour into the drawing and thus ruining my piece. Well, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, starting to introduce quite a bit of water onto this page, but there's no wrinkling at all because I've stretched the piece, taken the time to stretch the piece, thoroughly dry it out. There's none of that wrinkling that you would get with a watercolour. It saves you using the very expensive, very heavy watercolour pencil, paint, even papers, what you can get hold of when you're playing around with things like this. What I'm trying to do is, as I go from one colour, rinse out the brush so I'm not contaminating different colours unless I want to do that. Wash the brush out, just give it a wipe for the excess. I think, as you can see there, I've got three very different techniques, what I've shown you. So, watercolour pencil, standard pencil, and then using ink, so your pens. These two obviously introduce water. We've got three very different ways in how to complete the skull, which we showed you how to draw last week. But as I say, have a play with it. Want the results yourself. Hopefully you have fun, and then next week we'll cover the drawing of the realistic skull. But thank you again for watching. Thank you again for contributing, subscribing, liking the pages, liking the videos. it's a massive boost to me that I'm actually doing something worthwhile with this, and keep on. I'll see you on the next video, and thank you very much. Bye bye.